Thanks, Scott. Welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here. Glad you guys came back after technical difficulties. Each week or every time we do this webinar, I pick a different topic that has to do with your experience in your relationships. And like Scott said, these don't just have to be romantic relationships, although most of what I talk about is geared towards romantic relationships, but there's definitely applicability like in the workplace with friendships, things like that. So if you have questions specifically about other relationship issues as it relates to what we're talking about or at all, we can certainly talk about that. So today we're going to talk about jealousy and the role that jealousy plays in a relationship. Um, this this is an issue with the couples that I work with in sex addiction recovery. This is a really difficult one, and hopefully what we talk about today will maybe do a couple things. Number one, I think help you understand why jealousy might be such a frequent part of your experience with a loved one who's experienced addiction, or if you're the one who's experiencing addiction, why you still might experience jealousy even if your loved one has never betrayed you. And the second part is hopefully give you a really clear way forward, one way forward with involving a partner, and one way forward if it's not possible to do this with your partner. So first, let's talk about kind of where jealousy comes from and what jealousy is. So jealousy has to do with an underlying worry of our partner's commitment level. And remember that commitment has to do with whether or not we think it's possible that our partner will hurt us, or how likely it is that they're going to hurt us. So when a commitment level is high in a relationship, it's not just that we're both in this for the long haul. It really has a lot more to do with, I think that long term, this is going to be a good thing for me. I think that long term, I'm going to experience more positivity than negativity, more healing than hurt. So I'm in this, and I'm in this strongly. So when we start experiencing jealousy, it's really not just about whether or not we think our partner is going to cheat on us. Although when there's been affairs or there's been addiction, sex addiction or porn addiction, that's a very real fear. It has to do more with that. Are you going to hurt me overall? So I've seen this in couples that I've worked with where there was no sexual betrayal that they spoke of, and I asked extensively about it. But this guy could not get it out of his head almost from the minute he met this woman who is now his wife. He could not get it out of his head that she was going to cheat on him. It really had nothing to do with her propensity to cheat. It had everything to do with, and we'll talk about this a little later on, it had to do a lot with his attachment background and his experience earlier on in relationships, where what he learned was people hurt each other in relationships. This can come from a relationship, or it can also be tied to a relationship where there's just not a culture of respect and appreciation. So not feeling valued by your partner can contribute to some feelings of jealousy, because I think a very natural human thought is, if they're not giving it to me, they must be giving it to someone that they love more. They must be just not interested in me, and they think that somebody's better for them. The truth is, there are some people and some relationships that just struggle with sharing appreciation and sharing those feelings of respect. I've had a lot of clients say to me, I get the impression that all I'm good for is what I can do for this person. And when I ask, why do you think that? They'll say, well, the only time they say they appreciate me is when I've done something for them. So while that may socially be the right time to say thank you, if that's not part of a larger culture of appreciation in a relationship, it can really kind of undercut some of the security that we feel. Our view of whether or not we ought to be jealous about our partner's romantic intentions going somewhere else, it can be accurate or distorted. That feeling we get of jealousy doesn't just come from because this one thing is happening. Like I've explained before, that feeling of jealousy can come from a lack of commitment level, a lack of appreciation and respect. So because that can come from either a real place or a distorted place, it's essential that this is talked about in relationships in order to resolve it. This isn't one of those things that we can just write off to ourselves and say, well, this is just all in my head, and I shouldn't feel this way, or this isn't all in my head. This is the only way that I should feel, and I'm not going to rest until I figure this out. You can't resolve jealousy in a relationship fully without talking with the other party and figuring out exactly what's going on. And my recommendation for handling that is with a qualified therapist, because conversations around how committed are you, I worry that you are sneaking around behind my back, or I can't shake this feeling. Those are fraught conversations. It's very, very hard to bring that to your partner's attention. And what professional qualified help can do is to help both parties stay grounded enough that we can actually get to the feeling behind the jealousy. That we can actually, lower the defenses enough to have a productive conversation. It's important when you do have those conversations, and I would say even in your own head when you're sorting through what's going on, to stay focused on your feelings. You may need to reference your partner's behavior, like, when I call you, it goes to voicemail most of the time, and then I see you interrupt our dinner frequently to answer calls from colleagues or friends or things like that. You may need to reference the behavior, but the real key to understanding what's going on and giving your partner an opportunity for a repair is to stay focused on your feelings. So I feel like I'm not important to you, or I feel like you don't value or respect me. I feel like you don't take my concerns seriously. When you can stay focused on your own feelings, not your partner's behavior, there's a lot more chance that you get reassurance. And reassurance is one of the antidotes for jealousy. I want to take a minute here to normalize that need we have for reassurance in our relationships. I don't think that the picture of mental health is a person who never needs to check in with anybody else. How are we doing? How do you feel about us? I actually think that's just the other side of the coin of not very healthy. Everybody has a need to be reassured to some degree in a relationship. And I think we all are going to have the need or find ourselves in a position where we might have to remind our partner that we need some of that reassurance. Or, hey, this is a minute where it really, or this is a moment where it would really count for me. It would really go a long way if I could hear from you why you like to be in a relationship with me, or what's the value you find in our relationship. I don't think that those asks are out of the question, especially if they're used in those tender, non-defended moments. If that's the only way we know how to interact with our partner, is that like constant reassurance, or if you reassured me 5 minutes ago, I can't remember that you reassured me, or I can't still feel that. That might be an issue to take a look at. But that need overall for reassurance and those bids we make for reassurance are a very normal thing. And it's important to have a relationship where there's a culture of being able to check in on how we're doing and how we feel, because it's a very human tendency to lose sight of kind of that overall. I was talking with a client last week. He met a new romantic interest, and he said, I'm freaking out today because she hasn't texted me back. And I said, when did you text her? And he said, 4 hours ago. And I said, anything in the time you guys have spent together that indicates to you that she has anything but positive feelings? And he said, no. And I said, so why wouldn't you assume that when she texts you back at the end of her work day, because you text her in the middle of a work day, that it's going to be anything but positive? And he said, I'll have to wait and see on that. And it turns out he texted me and he said it was all positive, and I'm really glad that I could wait instead of hound her. We all have that need for reassurance. Another big contributor to feelings of jealousy can be sexual disconnect. Again, there's that feeling of, if we're not doing it together, it must be happening somewhere else. Or maybe the reason why this person's not interested in me is because they found something better, or they want something better. In couples in recovery from sex addiction specifically, there are so many reasons why the sexual relationship isn't working well, or can't work well, or why it's not happening. And so this is another reason why it's really important to be able to talk together and to gauge what's actually going on, because it may have nothing to do with the level of attractiveness. In a lot of the mother enmeshed men work that I do, a lot of these men can't be sexual or fully sexual with the partners that they choose, because they've got too much confusion and too much wrapped up in their head in an inappropriate relationship with their mother. And it has nothing to do with how desirable they find their partner. It has a lot to do with how disloyal they feel if they attach to and have affection for anyone else who's not mom. So it's important to talk about, or it's important to understand where your level of sexual satisfaction is if this is a romantic or an intimate relationship, because that can contribute to some of those feelings of jealousy that can be underlying there. It's important so now we're going to move into the second part. Like we just talked about some of the reasons why jealousy might exist. So now we're going to move into the second part, how you might move forward in being able to make some progress in the realm of jealousy. So whether you're talking with your partner or not about this, I think it's really important to identify really specific incidences and really understand why that triggered jealousy for you. And part of that understanding is the context of the current relationship. So if it's, my SA partner has a history of cheating on me, and we were in a store and he was really over flirtatious with the clerk at checkout, that's a really important context to be able to place your jealousy in. Jealousy is a really appropriate emotion for that, and that's something that would need to be talked about. It may be that I can't pinpoint anything specifically they did, but I just left with this feeling that they don't like me as much. It kind of felt like the time when, dad didn't come to my performance, my choir performance or whatever. It felt like that time where, my first boyfriend told me that I just wasn't interested, and that's why he couldn't date me anymore. Identifying really specific instances rather than this overall feeling really helps us zero in on where is this coming from, and it makes the processing a lot more productive. When we can talk about specific behaviors, specific feelings, specific instances, it kind of gives us a box with some handles to hold on to, rather than like a 50-gallon bag full of water. It's really hard to lift. The other thing is, since this deals with relationship insecurity, it's very important to consider how childhood experiences tie into how we might experience jealousy, or how easily we might feel replaced in a relationship. Because what's underlying jealousy is really attachment. It's really that sense of belonging in a relationship. So if that's something from day one or from childhood that has been fraught for us or hasn't worked very well, that will definitely play a role in how we feel about our current relationships. And that's not necessarily a problem. I think that the bigger issue is not, am I just feeling what this relationship is all about? It's, can I understand where I came from and what I'm experiencing now? And then can I move in a direction that's helpful for me long term? The last part of processing jealousy is making the request of a partner. So any kind of processing a relationship does, I think often needs to end in a, what would help me in the future, or going forward what I need, or next time this comes up, what would be really helpful, because it gives us some points of accountability. Number one, for ourselves. Am I being an advocate for myself? Am I speaking up, or am I being a passive participant in this relationship? It also gives a point of accountability for our partner. Okay, we talked about this, and I felt like you understood me, but then the next time this came up, the next time we were in the store, you did the same thing. So ask really clearly for what you need, and then move back to an observational standpoint and look at how your partner responds. Watch how they respond to that request, because that tells you a lot of information about whether or not, first of all, they value what you were saying, whether or not you were clear in it. It also tells you about that feeling of commitment, which is really what underlies jealousy. So if you see your partner respond and they become softer, they become empathetic, maybe you're in the store again and they cross that line again, but then immediately after they say, I am so sorry for what I just did. I realize that is so hard for you. I feel terrible. What you're looking for is is my partner able to respond to me? Because that's really what gets at that commitment feeling. Do they recognize when they step on my toes? do I see them thinking about it? Because it's that level of commitment and that feeling of safety in the relationship long term that really helps with jealousy overall. So that's the content that I have today for jealousy. You're welcome to ask more questions about that or questions about anything else in general.
Thank you, Jon. And just a reminder to everybody, the best way to ask questions is through the Q&A feature, but you can also use the chat feature. Just try to direct them direct to Jon and I so that it's more anonymous. And we've got a couple questions for you already. So let's see. Wow.
Yeah.
Coming in fast and furious today. That's cool. First question, can you talk a little bit more about mother enmeshment? Good, I was going to ask you to do that. I've recently discovered that my partner of 6 years is a sex addict and has been cheating on me in the past year. He's now said that he thinks he has a Madonna whore complex that makes it difficult for him to see me in a sexual light. Is that any way linked to mother enmeshment? Interesting.
It can be. Mother enmeshment is not the only place that that comes from. There's a lot of places culturally where we get this, like, we want our women to be intensely sexual and we want them to be intensely virtuous. So it would be really important for your partner and maybe your partner and you, if you guys are doing some marital work right now, to explore a little bit more where that comes from. If it does come from mother enmeshment, what that might sound like is, something like, my mom was just the best woman that I know and no one will ever compare to her. Or it may look like, I only experience my mom as completely overbearing and I can't stand the thought of having anyone else in my space. So rather than saying, hey, sex is really hard for me right now, and I need to figure that out, where a man might go with is like, you're too bad, you're too dirty for me to want to have sex with you. If you were more virtuous, if you were a better partner for me, then I'd want it. So it's this externalization of this internal conflict. Anytime there's a Madonna type and whore type complex, which, to explain for those who don't know that, it's this idea of the Madonna, like the mother of God, most virtuous woman in the world, versus the whore, the bottom of the heap. I would say a lot of the men that I work with struggle with that idea that real women are somewhere in between. They're not on either of the extremes. And the elements of both are actually really important in being a rounded person. So anytime there's this kind of Madonna whore complex, I would say that's an externalization of an internal conflict. I don't know how to see you as a rounded human being with flaws. So I either gun for you to be this, perfect partner, or I'm having an affair with someone who can be intensely sexual with me and there's no emotional connection. That separation has to do with the inability of that person being able to hold a complex sexual partner. So some good ways to explore a little further is this mother enmeshment. Dr. Ken Adams, who literally wrote the books on this, his website, overcomingenmeshment.com, has some screeners, some screening surveys. It also has some videos. And those might be helpful if your partner is open to looking at it, seeing if some of those narratives resonate with him. It might be helpful for you to look at to see if some of those narratives resonate with you. At the very least, I think there's something hopeful in here where he says, I think I have a Madonna whore complex. Some focus on that I think likely would be really good and yield some good insight and maybe even some change. And so encouraging him in that direction, whatever's going on with you and whatever's underneath that, I would really love for you to look at that, because this is hard for me to feel like I can't meet the expectations you have for me.
And mother enmeshment it really does a number of people. It tends to occur when the father is absent in some way, either through addiction or just emotionally absent or whatever. And then the mother will focus on one of the kids, usually a son. And as Jon said, either my mother's the most wonderful person, she just constantly took care of me, nobody else can measure up, or you're just smothered, and anybody in your space, it's just, you'll find any reason to not let somebody in your space, especially emotionally. And that's why and I have mother issues, and I was smothered, and the thought of somebody emotionally in my space, it still makes my skin crawl.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of work to be done if your husband's dealing with that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I highly recommend the Adams stuff. His book is Silently Seduced, wonderful. So, let's move to the next question, John. Here.
Yeah.
Okay, I am 2 years in this journey of sex-addicted husband, though only 8 months in semi-qualified therapy. I don't know what semi-qualified therapy means, because I've always been the strong wife. I can't get my husband to acknowledge or believe the depth of trauma that his infidelity and compulsive sexual behavior have affected me. He doesn't believe I have PTSD and feel that he waves away the effects. He hates that I listen to and read material to help me and us. You want to comment on maybe comment on betrayal trauma a little bit to validate?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a really big breakthrough in understanding partners of sex addicts when as professionals we were able to say, hey, this looks a lot like post-traumatic stress disorder, because it is. And what that means is there was a giant shock to the system that I wasn't ready for, wasn't anticipating, wasn't equipped to be able to respond to. And so it's just kind of stuck with me. In PTSD, there's a few things going on. First, the body's stuck in this hypervigilant fight or flight or freeze response, and we can't get back to that window of tolerance where things just kind of flow. One of the reasons why the body gets stuck there is because we don't know if the danger's over yet. And so I would say it's the exception to the rule when I work with a partner who does not have signs and symptoms of PTSD when there has been sexual betrayal and sexual addiction. This is what you're saying here. It makes me sad because this is a really difficult situation, and the person who could make a choice for it to be different isn't making the choice for it to be different. I'm really glad that you're reading and listening to material that can help you and can help your relationship. That's exactly what a sane person would do when there's a threat to their relationship. They try to figure out how to help it. There's a lot of reasons why I see men, stereotypically men not being able to go to the empathy piece and acknowledging the damage done, is because if they acknowledge the depth of your pain, what comes with that is the fact that they did that to you. There can be a lot of shame that gets in the way of that acknowledgement, and even going to the extent of saying, well, that doesn't happen, it doesn't exist, that's not what happens for people. That's all an attempt, I think, to push away those feelings of responsibility and those feelings of shame and hurt that come along with recognizing that you've really hurt somebody. What I would say in this is keep going on a path that makes you feel like you're reaching some healing and some sanity. Hopefully, whether it comes through a bump on the head or it comes through a come to Jesus moment, or I don't know, hopefully he's able to come around and see some of that and be softer. Warm invitations to read, to understand. I don't think that those are ever out of bounds. At the end of the day, he'll make the choice that he's going to make, and that could either bring a lot of relief or a lot of pain for you. And I'm sorry you're in that position where you're waiting to see whether it's relieving or painful. It's a very hard place to be.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And there's research that shows that betrayed partners truly do have symptoms of PTSD. They may or may not actually have PTSD, but they certainly have symptoms of PTSD from learning about the betrayal. So, I'm going to pull a question out of the chat feature here.
Yeah.
This one says, my husband rejected me sexually for years, told me it was because of my jealousy. Yet I only felt threatened by other women because I couldn't seem to get my husband's attention. It's so frustrating because he blames me for why he didn't want me, yet the whole time he was sneaking off to his porn habit, choosing it over me. What words can I say back to him when he again tells me it's my jealous behaviors that have created the distance between us? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Jealousy or porn?
The couples that I work with love to endlessly debate um, who set this in motion? And I would say if the goal of the relationship is to figure out who caused the problems and have that individual fix it, you're on the right track. If the goal of the relationship is to be able to come together and support one another, and to long term have a relationship that that you both really want to be a part of, it doesn't really matter where it started. What matters is the feeling right now is, I can't get your attention. I don't know how to break through to you. I feel like you're more absorbed with the women that you view in porn than you are with me. That makes me feel so, I feel like you're ready to leave at any minute, and that scares me to death. And it may be, through working with a lot of sex addicts, it may very well be that if your husband was in an emotionally grounded place and was able to articulate, he might say something like, I worry about being able to keep you interested in me. I worry about being able to perform. I worry about being able to be enough for you. I don't know if I make enough money. I don't know if I'm a good enough husband. I don't know if I'm a good enough father. It terrifies me when you approach me for sex, or when you show interest in me. And it's a lot easier for me to say it's because you're jealous than it is for me to say I'm scared. More often than not, that's what I see going on in dynamics like this. And again, it takes that, I think, commitment from the coupleship, and maybe those are part of the words that you use is, hey, do we want to go the rounds with this jealousy conversation again, or can we talk about some of the deeper stuff? Like I mentioned earlier, jealousy is related a lot to the level of commitment in the relationship. And remember that commitment is about this, how likely do I think it is you're going to hurt me? That may be the real conversation. And so that might be something with some qualified help, or even being able to say, hey, I would like to have this conversation again, but I want to see if we can leave the word jealousy out of it, because I don't think that's everything that's going on. I could tell you, I'm really scared that you're ready to leave me. And when you use porn, it makes me feel like that's even more likely. That's one of the big reasons why I'm anxious. Would you be open to thinking about what you're feeling around that and what you might be scared of in our relationship? I'd really like to see if we could help each other with that. And then see, again, warm invitations can be declined, and that's hard. But I would take some of the information we talked about today and see if you can peek behind jealousy, because that almost seems to be the distracting phrase here, preventing us from getting at the real issue.
Yeah, I love pointing to what underlies the jealousy, which is fear about the relationship and the commitment. It's like when anger, if you can get under the anger and figure out what's going on, you can actually deal with the problem. You can fight the problem instead of fighting each other. So yeah. I want to take another one out of the chat feature here. This one is actually an addict. I've been sober for 1.5 years, doing some EMDR work. I still have rage that my wife triggers me, and every time I verbally slip and I yell or I'm mean to her, she gets pushed further and further away from us and me. Then he says, I assume this is a guy, my emotional relationship ability is so far behind my addiction recovery. I'm frustrated, and so is she. We are working with the couples counselor, and I'm learning empathy, but I'm still angry and have rage at times, and I don't want to let her in at times. He wants to know if we have any advice for that.
Yeah. First of all, I'd say you're in really good company. Your emotional progress is behind your recovery. That seems to be how it works. In situations like this, especially when those triggers are related to some deep-seated things, when you're saying you're doing some EMDR, my guess is you and your therapist have really identified some trauma and some issues to work on, which is great too. In situations like this, prevention may not be possible yet. And that's where I think apology and a willingness to apologize and a willingness to go back and repair is so, so important. In essence, I work with, so I have a 9, almost 10-year-old son, and I have a 7-year-old son. And this is something I try to drill in their heads, is that one of the most important things they can learn to do in a relationship is to apologize when they're wrong. and I'll tell them, like, you are going to make mistakes and you are going to hurt each other. You'll hurt mom and dad, you'll hurt friends. Like, that's just going to happen. If you can be committed to being able to say, I'm sorry, and to do that effectively, and to work on making restitution, eventually you'll get to a point where you don't hurt people in that same way. That's part of how we learn. So, my words of advice here would be to look at how committed you are, where the level of shame is at when you have one of these rage episodes. Can you go back and can you apologize? An apology doesn't come with a promise that it'll never ever happen again, because sometimes we can't promise that. Apology is a recognition of hurt, a willingness to help resolve and heal that hurt, and a commitment to keep working on it. I don't want to keep hurting you in this way. I'm going to keep on this with my therapist. It may even be, clearly I might need to read more books about this. I might need to find a group specifically around anger management. I think that show of a willingness to keep working on it, even if you don't have all the pieces right now, that can go a long way in, again, showing that commitment to the relationship. My intention is not to hurt you long term. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of the addicts that I work with, their commitment to sobriety and their ability to gain sobriety does not directly equate into, now I'm really emotionally skilled. Like, there's so much to learn. And a lot of that learning, I think, when it comes to emotions and relationships, comes through trial and error. So a recognition of how maybe unfair that is and how damaging that is to your partner, that can be showing some of that empathy. You shouldn't have to put up with this. I shouldn't do this to you. I get that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I really wanted to get that question in because, as a recovering addict, I know that it's 2 steps forward, it's 1 step back, and there's a lot of failure, and it can be discouraging to you and to your partner. But I think what Jon said about just acknowledging it and showing some empathy is right on the money. So, let's go on to the next one. My husband was able to triangulate me using porn. He would push me away physically and emotionally. He would sabotage any attempt on my part to engage in sexual intimacy. But then as soon as I would fall asleep or leave, he would turn on the porn. I ended up being jealous of porn, feeling like I couldn't compete with the entire internet.
Yeah, this is a good example of thinking through specific instances. Why do I feel the way that I'm feeling? That can really help to clarify, because one of the natural places for us to go when we might feel some jealousy is this, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe there are some things that I need to work on. If I was prettier, if I was in better shape, if I was in a better mood, you could go down this endless list of if I only, if I only, if I only. But when we look at those specific instances, it seems pretty clear to me here that this isn't really an issue of whether or not you're good enough or attractive enough to your husband. This is an issue of whatever's going on with him. He would rather, maybe it feels safer, less anxiety provoking to turn to porn than it does to turn to a human being to get needs met. A good example of thinking through the specifics and being able to identify what's going on around jealousy.
Yeah. I'm loving this next question because I hear this a lot. My SA husband complains that I'm latched on to reading books, listening to podcasts and webinars, dealing with sex addiction, his betrayal trauma, hers, my PTSD symptoms, and how to help me heal. I feel as if I'm not allowed to talk about our life or ask questions. So he's jealous of her putting time and effort into recovery.
Yeah. I see that a lot. It reminds me, it's an older movie, the movie Lorenzo's Oil. And I forget what disease the little boy ended up having, but his parents, like doctor after doctor, could not answer the questions. And so his parents essentially became medical experts in this, and they discovered this, through all of their research and all of their work, they discovered this concoction, this oil concoction that actually helped to reduce a lot of symptoms. And the movie's all about how this became an all-consuming pursuit, primarily for the wife, but also for the husband on occasion. And one of the issues that they grappled with over and over again was this, like, how much is too much? And does this really have to be your whole life pursuit? And that question was never settled. They never got to a place where, like, okay, I've done enough, we don't have to do anymore. I think this tension exists in any relationship where there's a relationship or a life-threatening issue going on. The way that some people deal with it is to gather a lot of information that can be grounding. I think for you, the question to ask yourself is, what the information that I'm getting and all the research that I'm doing, is it actually grounding me? Is it moving me in the direction that I need to be moving? If it is, keep going. If it's not, and it feels like I just spin my wheels, or every time I read this, I'm ramped up, you might want to look at, why do I continue to pursue information that's not really answering the questions that I have, or not really bringing me peace of mind? A lot of partners that I work with, I'll see them go to information rather than turn to a relationship that's still dangerous, or not safe enough. And that's a valid reason not to turn into the relationship. This is one of those things for me that I don't think the issue is the books that are being read and the time that's being spent. It's the issue is more about, how does it feel for us to be in the relationship we're in right now? And maybe I'm choosing reading and information and all of that because that feels so much more grounding to me than what you and I have together. And until that is dealt with, that reality about how the relationship feels right now, you're both going to go off in your separate directions, and maybe feel resentful of the direction the person's going in. I think the first step to solving any problem or making a change is to admit what's not working. And so I would also be curious from your partner's perspective. You said this is your husband. I would be curious from your husband's perspective. Why is it difficult for him to talk about SA issues? Like, how much shame is there? Does he feel like he's grounded in his own recovery and he knows the direction to take? I work with a lot of folks in recovery who initially kind of take the stance of, my spouse is doing so much reading and they're telling me what's going on. So, I'll just wait for my spouse to tell me what's going on. And eventually down the road, they say, my spouse is getting it wrong. They're not understanding me. They're understanding what they're reading in the books, but they're not understanding me. And my question to them is often, how much have you looked into this? Where do you see yourself in this? And they'll say, usually they'll say something, well, I haven't read much, or I don't really know where I fit in this. And I think that's an important place to start too. So, I think asking the question about, why do you think this is difficult for you? Why do you think this is triggering for you? That could give a lot of information about where your partner may be. Again, it's that I'm worried. It's that, like you had mentioned, Scott, it seems like the jealousy is towards recovery. And so it may be that there's some reassurance about the relationship, or some reassurance about how that person is valued, maybe for both of you, that you might be looking for, that's not coming to the surface now.
Yeah, and I like that question because I see this same jealousy from both sides. I see it from partners who are jealous that the addict is spending so much time on recovery, and I see it from addicts who are jealous that the partner is spending so much time on recovery and healing, and it just requires some conversations and reassurance. It's the whole jealousy thing. I think it
Yep.
really plays in right here.
Yep.
Next question. What does a successful recovery plan look like? My husband's in individual therapy and we have sporadic couples therapy. He listens at times to podcasts, and it sounds like he's not doing 12-step work. Thoughts?
So a successful recovery plan looks like one that works. So if you're getting more sober, what you're doing is working. If you're not, what you're doing is not working. There are so many options out there, I think, and so many good options out there. I think part of a good recovery plan is a willingness to try out, explore, see what fits, see what you're excited about. It's the same principle in dieting. One of the reasons why diets don't work for people is because they can sustain it for about 3 months. And then at the end of that, it's a lifestyle that actually drives them crazy. Recovery can be the same way. This is hard because for, being the betrayed spouse, the feeling is, I don't know how much time you have to explore what works for you. I really need you to stop betraying me like yesterday. And so there can be a lot of tension between partners about, this is what I want you to do. This is what I need you to do. I think that's important to share when you're the betrayed spouse, the feeling of, there are some things that I'm needing to change because they're hurting me and they're not changing. I really need you to address that. I think that's important to share those feelings. Some of that pressure from a spouse can actually bring some focus, and it can bring some of that, like, okay, I've got a decision to make here. Either I stay with my pace and what I'm comfortable with, or maybe I need to step that up because it's not just about me and what I'm comfortable with. There's a big difference at the end of this question. He feels like he's doing all that he can or should. There's a big difference between what we can do and what we should do.
Yeah.
And for me, there's so many aspects of recovery that if I just focused on what I could do, what I could do was, act out or act poorly in response to what was going on for me emotionally. What I should do, or what I wanted to do, was learn how to function better. And so, yeah, I would just say there's a big difference between what you can and what you should do, or maybe a better word is what you need to do. And to me, that's really what recovery, that's what a solid recovery plan is I'm clear on what my needs are, and I'm committed to meeting those needs and addressing those needs. Recovery is not a blind stumble through a dark room, although it may start that way. Eventually, we start getting really familiar with what's in that room. Maybe we even learn how to turn on some lights so that we can see what's going on, and then we can respond in really direct ways.
Yeah. My hope is that your husband's therapist is trained in treating sexual addiction.
Yeah.
Usually somebody who's trained in treating sexual addiction will insist on more than just individual therapy. There's going to be
Yeah.
group therapy. They'll push for 12-step meetings or online support or something. So I worry if the therapist is complicit in this, that maybe it's not the right therapist.
Could be, yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is, yeah, we already answered that one. This is a fun one. My husband has never really been jealous. I've always been slightly annoyed that there isn't even an ounce of jealousy in his mind when I get male attention from elsewhere. Now that I've discovered his sex addiction and his cheating, it makes more sense. He says he has completely detached love and intimacy from sex. Because of this, he's even suggested that me being sexually unfaithful wouldn't necessarily hurt him as much as emotional infidelity. Is there a way to reset the part of his mind that separates love from sex? How long does that take?
Yes, there's a way to do that. How long it takes is I have no idea, because essentially what the person has to be able to tolerate is the risk that comes from being attached to another person. That's what jealousy is a sign of, is that I'm recognizing there's a risk here. For some people, the way they've coped with overwhelming hurt and risk in the past is, I'm just going to detach from any outcome in this relationship. I'm going to tell myself I don't need it, the relationship ultimately, so that way I don't have to have any feelings about it. That is not mental health. That's living in a really scared, protected way. So, this kind of change, I think it takes a lot of individual therapy. This is where groups can be really, really powerful, because being in a group dynamic, or even just a setting with one other human being that's focused on this, you can't be in a room with another human being and not have your attachment system activated in some way, the part of your nervous system that seeks for safe connection. And what a good therapist, or a helpful group can do with this is, when they see that attachment system being activated and this person doing this, like, oh, no, I'm not feeling this, they can help to ground that person. They can find out, okay, what's going on, what's the fear here. Maybe you can hold on to that fear of getting close to me a little bit longer. You know, maybe even teaching that person how to ask the right questions, or to ask questions at all, to help them ascertain how safe they are, rather than providing safety from just not being connected to or caring for anybody. So yeah, it definitely can be healed. How long it takes, I think, has a lot to do with that individual's willingness to substitute their disconnection for vulnerability, which I think is a really hard sell. A lot of people could go a whole life telling themselves they don't need anybody, and they could do reasonably well, just not in their relationships, and their partner's certainly not going to do well. So it's that recognition that I actually do need relationships. I do want relationships, and what comes with that is a degree of uncertainty, and I've got to learn how to tolerate that.
John, are there things like actual exercises that couples can do to kind of work through this, like, you know, holding hands
Yeah,
and looking into each other's eyes and
yeah,
talking about sex without having sex to develop some
yeah.
intimacy? You know, I mean, are there suggestions?
Yeah, those are really great suggestions. One of my favorite things, and I make couples do this in front of me. I make them stand toe to toe, knee to knee, hip to hip, chest to chest, and I make them hug until two things happen. Number one, they can feel themselves relax, and number two, they can feel their partner relax. This kind of change is really a nervous system to nervous system type change. It's not an intellectual shift. It's learning how to feel safe in the presence of another, feel grounded in the presence of another. So things like eye gaze, things like hugging and holding until we feel ourselves relax, because our bodies are designed to do that, to regulate along with another person. Um, uh, I'm trying to think of some others. You know,
Anything that I think involves touching while being emotionally intimate without turning it into sex can help
yeah,
build that bond, I think.
yeah. I even see with a lot of couples like taking walks together. This is something my spouse and I do. We try to do 3 or 4 mornings a week. There's a loop by our house. We really like to walk with the dog. And what we found in the beginning, the goal was to get exercise. And so, you know, we'd go with our headphones and we'd have our playlists, and we both get a really good workout. And over time, what we found was we're like, this is silly. There's not many times in the day where we have like an hour and a half together. Let's take the headphones out. And what we found as we talked is, or as we walked, what we ended up talking about was whatever was important to us that day, whatever was on our mind. And we weren't doing a whole lot of like looking at you while you talk, but she was right there beside me. I was right there beside her. And there's something about that rhythm, you know, our bodies getting in rhythm together, that really opened up some more intimacy. And now it's a part of our routine that if we don't hit it, we both really feel it. We both really feel that disconnect, and we both miss it. So, you know, things that get you into your body, whether that's eye gaze, touch, walking, hugging, and then the ability to reflect a little bit afterward. What is this doing for us? How did that feel for you? What came up for you? That would be the, if I could outline a rest, that would be the recipe of things that I would suggest in being able to work on that.
Yeah. I think we've got time for another one here. I'm going to skip to this one. This is a follow-up question, I gave my husband a boundary. This is the one we're worried about, the husband's therapist perhaps not being the right therapist. I gave my husband a boundary for a long overdue therapeutic disclosure, but his therapist, who's not a CSAT, is an LMFT, basically told him to start writing his sexual history and then to get a book from Amazon or to Google an outline for disclosure, WTF. There was no assistance and no experience with assisting addicts, a sex addict with disclosure. How do I get my husband to see this is not a qualified therapist?
Oh boy.
Yeah, big question.
That's a really hard sell, because my experience, so like on my website, I don't even know if I have my credentials listed. I don't know that I say anything about being a certified sex addiction therapist, because I know that what I write speaks to people who need my help and who I'm qualified to help. And that, I would say, is one of the most, the biggest thing that someone's looking for when they get into therapy is, do I feel like this person understands me? A lot of clients don't ask, do I feel like this person's qualified to help me? So it's a hard sell to get someone to see that their therapist is not qualified. What I recommend here, if you're working with a CSAT or another qualified sex addiction therapist, I would maybe advocate for that therapist to reach out to his therapist and to see if they could do some collaboration in moving you guys towards this disclosure. What I've seen happen in that, when there's a therapist who's out of their depth, when it comes to disclosure, who doesn't have the training. A couple things that can happen. One is that the client who's working with that therapist can start to see, like, I'm getting more direction from your therapist, and it seems like when I have questions, it makes more sense to talk to your therapist than it does to mine. That seems weird. So they might have that recognition. Um, the other therapist might rise to the occasion. I've seen people who have gotten CSAT training or other qualified training because they collaborated with a CSAT on this. And they thought, if I'm going to do this work, I really ought to know what I'm doing. And maybe that therapist has a course change, and they do get qualified in order to give the help. I think the key here is for you to stay focused on the boundary that you have. So I have a boundary of a therapeutic disclosure, especially that follow-up. If my boundary is not observed, what do I need to do with this? I have seen spouses outline explicitly, I need you working with a qualified trained therapist. If that doesn't happen, I don't know how our marriage is going to move forward, and I don't have hope. So it may come down to making it that explicit. But yeah, this is a hard one. Your WTF expression had him Google it. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. That's not how a therapeutic disclosure comes together. That's not how we find what's best for a couple. So I'm sorry that's been your experience. But I would try those routes. See if your therapist can reach out to his and get some collaboration going. Or if you're prepared to make that boundary explicit, I need you working with a qualified sex addiction therapist, or I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, it could even be, if you're going to stay with your therapist has to consult with its CSAT
Yeah.
about how to do disclosure. There's a wonderful book coming out about disclosure, but it's not out yet. So, but Dr. Stephanie Carnes has basically done an entire book on how to do sex addiction disclosure. But it'll be out in the spring.
If you don't mind me suggesting one as well, Scott, if that's okay.
Please.
So there's a workbook by Dan Drake and Janice Cottle, who are both CSATs, and they've provided training for CSATs on disclosure. They have some workbooks both for partners and for addicts in preparing for disclosure, which I find very, very thorough and very, very helpful. So like there are good books out there. Not every book on disclosure I think is a helpful one for couples in sex addiction recovery, but anything by Dr. Carnes, Stephanie Carnes, or anything by Dan Drake or Janice Cottle, I would recommend to clients, and I would trust.
Yeah, just understand that disclosure it's a process, not an event. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of back and forth, and then the event takes place, and then there's processing after, and you've got to have support in place. Yeah, I would not want to do disclosure with somebody who did not know how to lead a disclosure, because it could be really damaging.
Yes.
Because it's just so painful.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah.
It's also freeing, and it definitely needs to be done, I think. But it can be a real disaster too. So.
I look at it as a re-breaking of a bone in order to reset it and have proper healing take place. It's not something you do out of the back of someone's trunk. Like you make sure there's a really high level of care and a high level of attention to what's going on, because it can compound the problem if it's not done in a helpful, sensitive way.
Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. We've actually run over a couple minutes. Apologize for the technical gaffe at the beginning. I will have that straightened out by the end of the day. Thank you, Jon, for being here, and thank you, everybody, for your great questions today. This was a great topic, great session.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you in 2 weeks, every second and fourth Friday with Jon.
Yep. See you, Scott.